Hello, so happy Friday everyone. Today is Friday, May 31st, and this is Frequently Asked Questions for Beginning Beekeepers, episode number 19. So thanks for spending your time with me. It's very flattering, those of you that keep coming back. If you're new to beekeeping, welcome. This is designed for the basic beekeeper. And those of you who just got your bees, great. If you don't have bees anymore and you're kind of just following beekeeping today, you're also welcome. Thank you for joining me. If you want to know what we're talking about in today's episode, look down in the video description. This is going to be a fairly long sequence, and that's because we're actually going out in the bee yard and we're going to do a split as well, and after we get done answering these questions. What I'll try to do is, other than line item everything that we're talking about in the video description, I will also put a timestamp on it for those of you who just want to go straight to the bee yard activity there, when we are swapping out, splitting a colony and installing queens. So we cover the whole thing. The queens got installed yesterday. So we'll get right into it. The very first thing here is by Argent Vixen. When choosing queens on the Bee Weaver site, and Bee Weaver is where I get a lot of my bees. These are Survivor line bees, hygienic stock, and I've had really good luck with them. Argent Vixen says, a Bee Weaver site, you can choose clipped, marked, and what are the advantages, and is there any advantage to an unmarked queen? So I've gotten them every way they come. This year, my bees all had a dot on the thorax, so they are marked, and that is a green color this year. It's one way of knowing for sure. If you want your bees marked, the queens, when you're looking in your hive, you know if you still have your original queen or not. I try to keep my queens for at least 2 years. In fact, the queen that has the colony that we split for the demonstration at the end of this, she is in her 3rd year, and right before I did that split, I lost her. So what we did was we ended up splitting a colony that had no queen, but there were lots of open brood and other things. We'll talk about that later. But you'll know for sure if your queen has been superseded by another queen because the marks are gone. So having a marked queen is an advantage if you're trying to track your queen to make sure that you haven't been superseded by another one. Otherwise, how would you know? You find a queen, unless you're very intimately involved in identifying the specific markings of your queen, you probably won't know if she's been replaced. So having a marked queen, the number one advantage, how old is the queen? You're going to keep that in your bee log, when you got the queen, what the source was. We have 2 types of bees in my bee yard this year. The Saskatraz bees, which we're updating on Frequently Asked Questions 20, coming up next Friday, because we're right at the 21st day now, so they are just getting built up, and we'll know more in a week, and we'll show that. So having marked queens, you know that the one that you ordered and installed is still there or not. Also, when you collect a swarm, if you catch a swarm in your bee yard or your field or somewhere nearby, your marked queen will be in that if that's your swarm, and you'll know for sure where that came from. So you're recycling your bees right back. So that's an advantage to having a marked queen. The other thing is you can sometimes get their wings clipped. I have one colony right now that has a queen with clipped wings. They did very well. She went through winter, and she did that in an 8-frame single deep box. So with clipped wings, what happens is the queen, if they go to drive the queen out and she's going to swarm, it's always the older queen that swarms out with the followers there. If she has clipped wings, she won't get very far, and she'll plunk right down in the yard in front of your beehive. That makes it easy for you to catch. Also makes them vulnerable to, if it rains on them and so forth on the ground, their chances are very low for survival. In fact, a swarm that doesn't get recovered by a beekeeper in general has a very low survivor rate. So rehiving those is the goal. It does not, by clipping the wings, it does not prevent swarming. It just prevents them getting very far. So if you're the kind of person that has frequent access to your bee yard, you're always aware kind of what's going on there, having a queen with clipped wings makes it easier for you, as I said before, to recover those bees once they come out. She just can't fly. So the other thing is there an advantage to an unmarked queen? An advantage, not really. The bees accept queens that are marked, unmarked, clipped, not clipped, all the same. So it's just a matter of whether you really care about tracking the progress of the queen and whether or not you still have the queen that you installed. So you really don't know. So if there's unmarked, if they're charging a fee for that, it's a very small fee to mark the queen or to clip the wings. In my opinion, well worth having your queens marked. It also makes it easier for you to identify and locate the queen when you're doing inspections of your hive, because you want those inspections to move along fairly fast. Don't loiter when you're looking into your beehives, and don't leave them exposed for long periods of time. It stresses the bees every time you get in there, no matter how much. Some people say that their bees love them and they love it when they visit and interact with them. They actually don't. Bees are intruded upon by us, and the more we can limit the time and exposure to the bees, the better. And now that I've said that, of course, we made a video that you'll see at the end of this where we did a split. And of course, I spent time videoing the details and showing you what you're seeing inside a beehive, because that's what I do. I really personally don't like even getting into the colonies for a long period of time like that. I only open the colonies when I have a specific purpose in mind, and I get through them just as fast and fluid as I can, and I get that colony buttoned up fast. So when I'm making a video, it is kind of a stressor for me because I really don't like having them exposed for so long. But that's for your benefit, of course, and that's how you learn. So that's pretty much it. Do you want to know if that's your queen or not? Mark the queen. Also, for those of you who are breeding and splitting from your queens, you'll notice that I only split from colonies that are at least 2 years old, and that the queen has been in the colony for at least 2 years, because I want genetics from queens that have longevity. So that's another aspect to that, and the only way I know that it's the same queen is if she's marked. Next one is from Hygiene. Is it possible to split a hive without a new queen? That's a great question, and that is exactly what led up to my demonstrating the hive split. Absolutely, you can split a colony without having new queens. Now, me personally, I order my queens in midwinter to make sure that I get the stock that I want. The queens, I get a delivery date from the bee weaver family in this case. So I know that they mailed on Tuesday, so I could expect them Wednesday or Thursday. That means I do my splits on Monday. That way, the hives that I split will have been without the queen for at least 3 days, and that makes them more prone to accept the queens when they do arrive. So a queenless colony is open and anxious to receive a queen. Now, what if I don't have a queen? This is something that I'll also talk about while I'm doing the split, part of the explanation, and what to look for. If you have open brood, if you have eggs and larvae and capped brood and all of the things that are going on in a healthy beehive that is productive, you do not need a queen. In fact, you don't need to locate the queen. You just find evidence that she's there. The evidence is there's eggs. If there are eggs that are not hatched yet, that queen has been in that hive and has been laying within 3 days. So, and then you go to the larval stage, then they're being fed and developed, and they can convert larvae into a queen at any time. The worker nurse bees can do that. One of the things you also want to look for is the colony that you're inspecting and thinking about splitting. Are they already developing swarm cells? Swarm cells are queen cells that are larger than normal cells, larger than drones, and swarm cells will be, if you're looking at the frame, and let's say this is all drawn out with comb and this is a brood frame, down along the edges, along the bottom, you'll see clusters of larger cells that look like planter's peanuts, the shell. And those are swarm cells down here. Now, if the bees are tired of their queen and they're about to drive her out or have recently driven her out, you're going to see a little peanut-shaped shell that comes off the face of this and curves down, and that is a supersedure queen cell. But what I'm saying is that if you see either swarm cells or supersedure cells that they're already making, and you can look inside them if they're not capped, and you'll see that there's royal jelly in there, that there is a developing queen, you know two things. One, you already have what you need to replace the queen, so you can make a split. The second thing you know is that that colony is prone to develop queen cells to begin with. If you don't see any queen cells, if you don't see any supersedure cells, if you don't see any evidence that that colony as a superorganism is trying to give birth to another colony, then splitting the colony without a queen is kind of a risky venture. First of all, there's a big delay. If there's no queen cell yet, and you split the colony, you have 16 days from the time they can create a queen, she hatches, and flies out and makes a successful virgin mating flight at the local drone congregation area. So you're gambling with the colony. On the flip side, if they already have several queen cells, and they always do, the most productive hives develop several, and you're going to see that in the video again at the end of this. If they have several, then that's their insurance policy that they're going to get one queen through. Usually your old queen will swarm out and depart the colony before a new queen is hatched. So there's a delay there, and that's when you would be installing the queens that you ordered, in my case from Bee Weaver. Also, again, as I mentioned before, we got Saskatraz queens this year. So if you have queens coming in, that's the insurance policy for the colony, because that colony is going to change its attitude a little bit. And I'm going to show you that too. When they are queenless and you've done a split and they are trying to replace that queen and they're drawing out queen cells and they're hoping to get that genetics going there and get that queen out and back, that's the risky time. You get a fertile queen back and she starts laying, they'll calm down again. So that's another thing I'm going to show you is the behavior of a colony that's queenless. They can get a little antsy. They can get defensive. So because they're unstable, they're not queen right, which is the term. Okay, so you can do the split without a queen. They'll create their own, but you're counting on a queen making her virgin flight and returning fertilized by drones from other colonies. So it does work. And we'll talk about that later. I'm going to show you up close everything that's going on. Next one is from Amy. This year the bees won't leave my dad alone. They attack when he's picking or weeding. They also do flybys. He's getting stung every time he's in the backyard. First of all, that's a highly sensitive colony of bees there. Those bees are not calm, but you need to look into what's going on with the bees. First of all, we need to check out that hive. You need to do an inspection. Do they have a queen? Are they productive in there? Is everything seem okay? Are they being overwhelmed with varroa? Are there things going on with the colony that are causing them to have this attitude issue? Now, if this has never happened before, and this is a new behavior, then the very first step I take personally is to evaluate the colony and see what's going on. If they're not queen right, you need to get them a queen and you need to stabilize the colony. If there's varroa and they're not holding their own, if they're not a varroa resistant line of bees or they're just overwhelmed no matter what, you may have to treat the colony. So you need to assess what's going on there. If you look at their landing board early in the morning, and I'm talking before sunrise, and you see a bunch of developing larvae and a bunch of detritus, and they're kicking out a bunch of material from the colony, they may be fighting with varroa and they're losing stock in there, which can stress and change the behavior of a colony. So let's say everything is great, they're queen right, the attitude is okay, and they're still workable if they're not a super hot colony. If they're super hot, there's no reason keeping them around. If they're stinging somebody that is, if your dad is just out in the yard and he's picking weeds and he gets stung and he's not directly adjacent to the colony of bees, you need to consider requeening that colony. So in fact, that's what I would do that first. Order in a queen that has the temperament and the production style that you want and is suitable for the zone that you live in. The next thing is, let's say you love all of those bees and you're not going to change it and you don't care if your dad gets stung. Then you want to start thinking about putting a fence around the beehive, around your apiary. Cause those bees to fly up and over and not put your dad in the flight path of the honeybees. Because wherever they're going to and coming from, he's evidently in the flight path unless you've got guard bees that are actually patrolling the area, which is another bad sign of a hot colony. Create barriers, tall hedges, redirect the landing board so that the bees are coming and going from a different direction. These are things that you do after you've determined that the colony has the right behavior to begin with and has the right circumstances and everything is good with the colony. So, but you need to protect your dad at all cost. So, if he's getting stung all the time and he's not happy, Time to make changes. Change the flight path, change the composition of the colony, change the genetics with the queen. Now, when you put a new queen in, how long does it take before all the worker bees have calmed down and they are now from the genetic stock of the queen? Minimum 21 days, but when you put a queen in there, she's not laying immediately, usually within a day or two. So now let's go out 22, 23 days, 25 days. So 30 days, you should see a profound shift in the composition of the genetics and behavior of your colony if you installed a new queen, because the brood and everything else continues to hatch. The old genetics are still there, and expect that behavior to continue for about a month. Next one, George, ant barriers. Oil versus car grease. Okay, first of all, I don't have a huge problem with ants. I had one colony that had ants going up and into the colony. Generally, what ants are doing is they're sharing the space with your bees. You'll find them up in the top inner cover, areas that are generally inaccessible to the bees. They're taking advantage of the warmth generated by the bees and the environment, and they're hauling their eggs up and down. When I first saw a troop of ants going up and down the side of a beehive, and they were all carrying their little egg cases, I thought they were actually robbing bee eggs. They weren't. They're just carrying their own eggs around. So what can you do to stop them? Well, if your hives are sitting flat on the ground, you've got a problem anyway, because you've got a lot of contact and your hive is very accessible. All of my hives this year, I only have one left that's still on concrete blocks. All of the others are up on iron T-posts. And then I have horizontal steel electrical conduit piping that's supporting them. So that's given me a lot of advantages. Number one, I can weed whack underneath the colonies and I can keep the grass nice and short. And this cuts down on a lot of pest issues. Even small hive beetles, which I have almost none. I found one small hive beetle, just one, and that was last fall. I haven't found any this year, which is great, but I'm supposed to be testing small hive beetle traps and I can't do it because I don't have any small hive beetles. It gets too cold and it freezes out and kills their larvae. Anyway, when the ants are climbing up these iron T-posts, and I know people go to elaborate methods, I don't like the idea of oil or car grease. Why? Because when it rains, oil and petroleum products like that are going to leach into your soil. It's unavoidable if you're coating your hive stand with it. So I personally scrap that. I don't want that I'm on a well. I don't want that in the water table. It's amazing how much just a little oil impacts a huge area when it comes to tainting your water supply. So for me, that's out. One thing that I do like to do and have experimented with many years ago when I was dealing with fire ants down in South Carolina, we used mint gel toothpaste. And if you take that, see ants, if you notice, they're in a little trail wherever they go. So when they're transiting somewhere, they're following the pheromone trail of the scout ants that have gone before them. That's why if you just rub your finger across that, or if you interrupt them with any kind of scent, they will run around in little circles until they relocate the trail further up and then they rejoin. But you can interrupt that with toothpaste on your hive stand. So if you've got legs supporting your beehives and you put that gel toothpaste around there, especially the mint gel, they hate that. The ants will avoid that immediately. So you're going to interrupt their line of travel. They're going to not reestablish that line of travel over that mint because they don't like it. And I think even the article that I read back then was that some of that mint actually would kill the ants if it was in direct contact with them. So something about toothpaste. I mean, that's everywhere. So rub that on there. And then if it rains and washes that down onto your ground or whatever, it's harmless. And you can just replenish it, rub a little bit more on those legs. I don't like the idea of the moats of water, and because you know what? Either it evaporates out and you forget about it, you put oil in there, it gets disgusting. Pretty soon it fills up with dead insects, and then they just walk across the dead insects and right up the thing. So think about the maintenance of whatever you're going to use to intervene with ants. So if you're in an area where ants are a big issue, then I would even do that before they ever start climbing up the legs and supports of your beehives. Go ahead and put that minty toothpaste coating on there, and it's going to keep them from getting up in your hives in the first place. But let's say they did get in the hive It's extremely rare that the ants are actually attacking the bees themselves. What they're doing is sharing space. They found a cavity, they found an area that shelters them from weather, and they're just keeping an ant nest in there. So you can take that out of there, and you can prevent them with toothpaste. If somebody else has an idea of what to do with ants that are getting into your hive, go ahead and post that down in the comments section. If you have a question, I know I didn't say this before, please write your question down in the comments section, and it may make it into frequently asked questions number 20 next Friday. We already have a list of questions started for next Friday because I'm just full today knowing that we're doing this split demonstration. Next is from Ron Edelman. What do you put on bee stings? Okay, rule number 1. Don't get stung by your bees. There's no reason to let your bees sting you. If your bees are having attitudes and you get those guard bees and they fly over and sting you, smoke your colony. My thing this year, I'm not smoking the colony. In fact, when you see my split demonstration, you're going to see I don't use smoke at all. What I do is, well, if you're getting in a big colony and you're going to do a split, you're going to be getting into their brood and everything, that's the time to use a smoker. Because you're doing a split, I would not use my 50-50 sugar water and Honeybee Healthy, Pro Health, whatever. I use essential oils instead of smoke now. But when it comes to pulling apart brood frame and getting right down into the very center of the superorganism of honeybees, and it's a supersized colony, which the one I did is, I do recommend that you use your smoker for that. Because you need to calm the bees and you don't want everything to be sticky with sugar syrup. Otherwise, though, if I'm just doing a hive inspection, I like to use, to calm the bees, 50-50 sugar syrup by weight, 2 pounds of sugar, 2 pounds of water, pure water, filtered water, and then I add 2 teaspoons per quart essential oils. And that calms the bees, feeds them, and lets me do whatever I want. And they're not going into their stores and eating their honey and stopping production and everything else as they do when you smoke your bees a lot. So if you're just doing an inspection, do that now. Protective clothing. Don't be afraid to wear protective clothing. So many YouTube beekeepers like to tell people not to wear protective clothing. Once you know your bees, you know, once you're not a beginner anymore and you don't need your bee suit, bee suits are, a waste. People that are telling people not to wear their bee suits, that is a huge mistake. There are old-timer beekeepers that have been doing this forever that open up a hive one day and pick up a whole bunch of stings. The other thing is, once you get stung, you can expect follow-on stings after that because you've been marked. So let's say the stinger, first line of defense, what to do about being stung. You get stung, the stinger is there, the worker bee detached herself and left that stinger behind, and the little muscle is contracting, and the stinger has serrated edges, it's working its way into your skin. That is one of the adaptations of the honeybee, that they can leave a stinger on a predator, and it does 2 things. 1, it continues to inject venom into the site. 2, it marks the predator for other guard bees to attack. So there's a pheromone alert that goes on. That's why sometimes when you get stung, one year I was stung right on the hand and I picked up 6 stings on the same hand in the same area within just a matter of seconds. So avoiding being stung is probably your first line of defense. So wear a protective suit, wear gloves. You can wear nitrile gloves or something like that if you need dexterity, because something about surgical gloves, even though they're so thin they really don't protect you from being stung, the bees are not interested for some reason in stinging through surgical gloves. It's really strange. So now you've been stung. You did everything else, you did everything you could, you still got stung. This is the #1 treatment for stings, right here. It's called Sting Kill. Kills the pain, stops the itch, maximum strength, benzocaine and menthol. So these are little capsules. And all you do is crack the capsule, shake it, and it has a little swab built into it, and you rub one of these capsules right on the sting site and you get immediate relief from the pain. And it even works, like they've got a big yellow jacket on the front of it there. So there are people that exterminate hornets and wasps and things like that, and this is the #1 recommended stuff. In fact, what does it say on here? #1 choice of pharmacists. Pharmacists know what they're talking about. Anyway, I always have this stuff around. You can get these in swabs or capsules like this. The capsules are the best because you can open this up and just have them in your pocket. The sooner you put this on the sting site, the quicker you're going to get that pain to go away. And have it around, because if you have visitors to your apiary and someone gets stung, it can really hurt. People that have not been stung before have no tolerance built up to bee stings. Now, by the way, some people will say that, oh, they've been stung so many times, they don't even feel it anymore. Well, my grandmother kept bees in Chester, Vermont. And my grandfather, for some reason, got stung a lot. And what happened was, instead of building up a resistance to bee sting venom, instead of developing an immunity, he went the opposite direction. And over the years, as he was stung, he developed a sensitivity to bee venom. So that backfired. Allowing yourself to be stung by bees in order to build up some kind of immunity or some kind of resistance to the sting to where you no longer feel it, I think a lot of it has to do with the expectation. If you're surprised by a bee sting, if you've never been stung before, then that sensation is alarming to people because they've never felt it before. If if I tell you to slap my hand or punch my hand and I expect it, that's one thing. If my hand is just out and I don't expect it, and somebody hits my hand, it hurts more. Is that a good analogy? I don't know. But if you're expecting to be stung somehow, the experience is reduced. If you're not expecting to be stung, and it often, people that have long hair, bushy hair, sometimes a bee will just get caught in their hair and can't get out, and then that bee panics and eventually just stings them. It's not because it was trying to be defensive in the first place, it just got caught up in their hair. So if you've got a lot of hair and you can pull your hair back into a ponytail or something, you're way ahead. Once you're stung, and this is the only thing I'm going to mention. Why? Because it works the best. There's no reason in talking about anything else. Oh yeah, I'll put links to that stuff down in the video description so you can find it. So that, Ron, is what we put on bee stings. Have it ready. Don't get on Amazon and order it after you've been stung. Have that in your medicine cabinet. Long shelf life. #6, Elizabeth Meyer. Difference between hybrid and heritage plants. I've heard bees will choose heritage plants over hybrids. Okay, this is interesting. They don't. Bees go where the nectar is, they go where the pollen is, and they don't know a heritage breed over a hybridized breed or genetically modified plant. So what the bees really care about is which plant is producing the most nectar, which plant is producing the most pollen. Some of the hybridized sunflowers, for example, are pollen-free. I hate that. If you're putting up sunflowers and they've been modified, I want a huge pollen load. That's the reason I plant sunflowers. I planted an acre of sunflowers this year because I want the bees to get the pollen from it. They also get nectar. Now, the pollen and nectar that they get from a genetically modified plant, is that going to be less nutritious or less attractive to the bees? Not really. What happens is the amount. So if they've modified the plant to produce less reproductive material because they're trying to control those plants and they want you to buy the plants from them every year, then that's a different story because they're yielding less. So the purpose of the plant and the purpose of the hybrid. So, hybridized corn, corn doesn't need bees to reproduce, but they do produce pollen on the corn. So your bees could actually get pollen from a hybridized corn. I'm not going to mention the company. That company, by the way, will come after even the little people. Being one of the little people, I don't want them after me. But I know that genetically modified corn with systemic pesticides built into it will have an impact on your bee brood. That's why every time the farmer in my area is planting crops in the hundreds of acres next to my land, I always want to know what he's planting. I always want to know what the impact is going to be on the bees. But the good thing is, if I can get the bees to go after something else during the time that these modified plants that have the pesticide built in, we're not talking about neonicotinoids and stuff like that, although that's another area. Plants that defend themselves right from the germ cell. they have an impact on bees. Why can't you go after the companies that do that? Because you have to prove that that company's plant killed or impacted your bees in a negative way. Sole source. You can't prove that. We don't have the money to fight that. Therefore, they get away with it. But as far as bees showing a preference for heritage, let's say I have, what's a good example? If you've got heritage vegetables in your garden, and you've got the hybridized vegetables that you get from one of the big chain stores, again, that we won't name. But if you go to one of the garden centers that sells the hybridized plants, the genetically modified plants, and you're looking at the activity of the bees on your garden, peas, for example, things like that, who's being pollinated, who isn't, they're basically being visited the same. I've not noticed that the honeybees will avoid hybridized plants, because sometimes the hybridized plants have been improved for an area. Their productivity is higher. They sustain themselves on poorer soil conditions. They grow in lower rainfall environments. So it all depends on the reason, and some of the heritage plants don't seem to do as well as the hybridized plants. So whichever plants are yielding the most nectar and pollen, your bees are going to go after them, and they've demonstrated no preference. So that's for that question. There's something I want to talk about as a tool. This is a frame holder. This thing is made out of stainless steel. This is the most heavy-duty frame holder I've ever found. Now, I demonstrate this when I do the split, but I wanted to talk about it a little more because look at the thickness of the material here. This slides onto your beehive box. Some people, when they're inspecting their beehives, pull a frame right out of the middle, and then they lean it on the hive on the ground. My personal recommendation is never put your frames of bees when you're doing inspections on the ground. Don't lean them on your landing board. Don't lean them against the hive. Don't put them on the ground. Keep them off the ground. Use a frame holder. Put your frames in the frame holder. This one holds 3. So my method, the cool thing is usually most frame holders are just 2 spines coming out. And then if you put the frame in wrong or it moves a little bit, it can fall out, or they can spread a little bit and your frame falls through. This one, no matter what angle the frame is in, it does not fall through. It also, if a frame is full of honey, this frame can weigh 10 pounds. What if I put 3 of them on here? That's 30 pounds on your frame holder. This thing can hold that much weight. So this is my new favorite frame holder, and plus you've got a handle here. See how it's bent out? You can grab it here with your frames in it and carry them. You can tote them. So I like this thing. I have a couple of these now, and what I do is I put one on each side of the box. I start at the end of the box and I pull an end frame first, and I put that in here. And you can slide that out to the end so you can keep them in the same order. And then you pull the next frame and you slide it in here. And then the third frame and you slide it in there. Then after that, you leave these on the side of your box, off the ground. All the bees are hanging out on here. Nurse bees don't know where they live. We don't want them flying off. And then you can continue to pull frame by frame and inspect those frames. If you're pulling them sideways instead of reaching in and pulling them straight up, they don't draw out their comb evenly. It'll be wavy sometimes, and what if you have one of those supersedure cells in the middle? If you're pulling it straight up and there's a concavity on the adjacent frame, you pull that straight up, you damage the cell. So when I'm looking for supersedure cells, or if I'm looking for swarm cells, by pulling the frames to the side nice and slow and having a rack like this right on that same box that I can put frames on, I don't damage, I don't roll the queen. You've heard that term sometimes. If you pull a frame like that, you run the risk of rolling the queen. What that means is if the queen is on the face of a brood frame and that brood comb is irregular, you pull that frame up, that you can press the queen against the frame and she can actually be rolled against it, because if it, on the surface of the frame, if the comb sticks out down here but then it goes concave up here, that means the adjacent frame has convex comb and then concave down here. As you pull it up, you're going to rub right against that. By pulling to the side, you avoid damaging comb, you're not going to damage queen cells, you're not going to damage your queen, which is the most critical thing. And please don't put your frames on the ground. Get a really good quality frame holder that is up on the same level as that box that will allow you to go through your stuff and then replace everything in the exact same order with the same contours. And again, we're going to show that in our how to split a beehive demonstration, which is coming up right now. That's it. This is all I have for frequently asked questions. Next, we're going to go out in the bee yard and we're going to show you step by step. Now, generally, beekeepers are so specific about everything they do. You know what? I'm sharing the way I do it. I play around with my bees a lot. I try new things out. I try to see what they do and what they don't do. You may not even like the way I introduce my queens, but you're going to watch and you're going to see at least a method that maybe you like or you don't like. You might do it this way. You might not do it this way. Thank you for your questions. If you have more questions for next week, please write them down in the video description. Now let's get out there to the bee yard and split a hive. Okay, so we're out in the bee yard finally. The weather's decent. What I want to show you here is this is a nice large hive, very productive. It's been through several winters, including the last terrible winter that we just had. And these boxes are absolutely loaded, and we're going to take the lid off and I'm going to walk you through making a split. All a split is taking an oversized hive that's probably ready to swarm, taking the resources and nurse bees out, and creating a new colony from that. I don't like to put my gear on the ground, so we're using this Be Smart Design hive stand that I use because it's lightweight. I carry it around. There's the website there, besmartdesigns.com. They have a new version of this, but I keep this out in my apiary, and whenever I'm working a hive, I stack them right on this stand. These things can handle several hundred pounds, and so I'm using that today. Now here's my colony. Look at the activity on the landing board here. They are very busy. We know that there's brood in there. They are bringing in bee bread, pollen on their legs, and we're going to go step by step. I also put my new hive visor on this thing, and that is a shade system that keeps rainwater off the landing board. I'm going to smoke these a little bit. Remember, we're going to get in the most sensitive area of the beehive. We're going to get into the brood chambers. Now this is the stand and this is the bottom board. I'm just showing you how I'm setting up the split box and I'm going to put them in. I have resources in it: honey, drawn comb. I'm using Pearco and acorn plastic frames here, one piece. And if you notice, it's a 10 frame box. And I've taken a bunch of frames out of the middle because that's where I'm going to put the brood. So I'm going to put 4 frames of brood in this box. Now what I like to do is lift this up just a little bit and I look underneath. And if there's a bunch of tissue connecting to the frames below, I would give this a twist before lifting it off. But instead it looks like I can pull it straight up. Also, we have a nice hot day today, so it's perfect for making a split. Now this is the top box. Remember, it's a medium super. And what do you think's in it? Not just thousands of bees, but it's wall-to-wall chocolate block honey. So this is all capped honey. These are resources I'm still going to leave for these bees. We have terrible weather coming, and they need it. So most of these bees are foragers. Some of them are what I call storekeeper bees that maintain the honey resources, nectar resources, and the pollen. Now I took a lid, put it on the ground, and I set this box right on that lid, and that's to keep them away from direct soil contact. Look how calm the bees are. It's very surprising. They are very easygoing bees. Now we're down in the next box down. This is a deep, and remember, when I pull frames, I take frames out of the end first, and then I slide the frames over. I do not go directly to a center frame, grip it, and pull it straight up because we risk damaging comb. And in this case, we might even damage some queen cells. We don't want to do that. And supersedure cells even, which are generally in the middle of the frame. We don't want to damage those. So we remove some of the side frames. I put them on the frame holder on the side of the box. And this will allow us to see what's going on. Now look, this is a brood frame, but there is some nectar in there. And at the bottom, look what we have. This is very common to see drone cells along the bottom edge. And that's what we have here, lots of drone, and of course I damaged some of the cells. Drones are male bees, if you don't already know, and their cells are much larger. These are normal worker cells here, so this is a brood frame, but look, there's a lot of open space here. So something is going on. Even given the size of this colony, I'm going to say that the queen either has gone or she's low performing here. And that cinnamon colored capping there is worker brood. Notice some of the workers going along with pollen still on their hind legs. And there are areas where there are drone brood here. Somebody's doing a waggle dance over there on the right. So the hive is active. They are still doing a lot of productivity. And there in the middle, look at that. There's 2 cups there. Those are queen cups. And the fact that they're in the field center areas of the frame lets me know that these are supersedure cells, which means this queen probably either she's gone already or she's not doing very well and the bees are about to drive her off. And you can see that there is royal jelly in those cups, so there is larvae, so they are developing queens. And here on the edge of the frame, now we have swarm cells. So again, if it's in the field, if it's in the center area of the frame, we're talking supersedure, unhappy bees with the queen driving her away. And if you see these frames here on the edges, these are swarm cells. So either way, this colony is making preparations to get rid of their queen. And they're going to replace her. But the good news is, if we split this colony and I take some of those cups with me, we have bees that are more than happy to make queen cells from the open brood, and they will survive. Look at the worker bees in the upper area, and then the lower, the cells that stick out really proud from the surface are drone cells. So there's a massive number of worker bees still hatching out here. And this is a great colony. I'm so glad I chose it to do the split. And I'm just going to show you the frames here. There is pollen stored here, nectar off to the right there. And of course brood to the left, brood towards the center. Lots of empty cells, and cells empty in the center field as well. Look at that one sticking out right there. That is a drone capped cell there. And by pulling, remember, the frames to the sides, pulling them away instead of pulling them directly up, I'm not damaging all of those portions of the comb that are sticking out, that are irregular. And that's why I like to pull from the end. Get more waggle dancers here. Nice larvae in there. These bees are amazingly calm. We did smoke them a little bit, but not excessively. And look here, we have open cells. So these are workers. That's great news. What I don't see any eggs. But as long as there's open brood like this, these bees, in the absence of a queen, can of course make their own. But it looks like this colony is already well on its way of replacing a queen, and I think there's a very good chance the queen is already gone. Now this yellow box, we're going to get into that too. Just looking things over. These are Pierco frames, and I've been replacing those with acorn frames. But as you can see, the bees really take to these pre-wax plastic frames in a good way. They absolutely use them. The rust colored stuff here is propolis. And there is a high population of bees here, so I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing. But this is a medium box. What I'm not seeing is, of course, the queen. Do we really have to find the queen? No, I don't think so. We don't need to find her. All we need is open brood. We're doing a split, and I'm going to replace this queen anyway, based on what I'm seeing today. We are going to introduce a replacement queen. Now, the queen that was in here made it through a couple of years, couple of winters, and she would have been great breeding stock. Look, there's honey here, lots of it, nice and heavy. So the outer frames of this box, again, this is a medium depth super. The outer frames are full of honey, so that's good to see. And we're going to put that in a rack here on the side of the box, and then we're going to go ahead and start working our way through. This is that stainless steel rack that I showed you before, and remember, these are honey frames, they're heavy. So, let's see what we have. Try not to bump and slam and cause vibrations in the colony. Look how calm everyone is. It would be a real shame to spoil that great passive behavior that we have. More honey. There are some open cells here, so there's room to expand if they wanted to turn that into brood. But the more I look at this, the more I think we don't have a queen, people. I think she just recently left. So either they drove her out, That's what those supersedure cells in the center were all about. They're getting rid of her. They're basically telling the world that they don't need their queen anymore. Or she left on her own. There could have been a swarm. And look at, there are bees hatching out right now. If you look at the cell lower right there, there's a worker coming right out of the top. They chew their way out. Nobody helps them. If it were a drone, they'd have to chew the drone out and feed it while it's coming out. Because male bees don't do any work, as we well know, except consume and look for virgin queens. And yeah, there's lots of empty brood in that frame underneath there. We're going to give you a close look, and of course, even more swarm cells here. Just a queen cup on the edge, bottom edge there. And these bees are very calm. Once again, worker brood everywhere, lots of pollen. They're just, considering what I'm doing to them, they're very calm. Now normally I would expect to see some eggs in here. These are brood cells right after the brood hatches out, adult bees, workers. The queen would come along and deposit eggs right behind them. And then of course the eggs would hatch, and then the nurse bees would start to feed them. So there's a conspicuous absence of eggs. So I'm doing this split actually right on time. The queens are already incoming. They're 3 days out. So I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing, and also comforted by the fact that I have a great healthy population of bees here. Now the other thing is, someone asked if do you have to put queens in? No, you don't. As long as you've got open breed and open brood, and these bees are making queen cells, it shows that they have the propensity to make those cells. And if there's open brood, they can feed them royal jelly and keep feeding them royal jelly and turn what would be workers into queens. And they never make just one queen. They'll do several of them. Now let's say there was a swarm. The swarm leaves the colony before the replacements hatch. So we're actually right in that sweet spot where we don't have any capped queen cells. So they're still working them up. Now it takes 15 days to produce a queen. And we're going to introduce new queens within just 3 days. We're going to beat those cells. And what happens to them if we install new queens? What happens to developing queen cells? Well, the workers, if they approve of the new queens, will just tear open the cells and get rid of the developing queen larvae. Now here's a split that we did. It's all installed. We have a deep that's full of resources, as you already saw. We have a medium that has empty frames in it, room to expand. When you do a split on this size and you have so many resources with it, you do need to add a box to give them room, otherwise you could cause a swarm. And then the feeder box on top. Now, I'm showing you the advantage of putting this hive visor that I made that's on the front of the hive. As I mentioned, we have a nice hot day. And look, it's at 101, 96, 99. If you're looking in the upper left there of this FLIR camera, and the surface of that visor gets all the way up to 120, 117. And then we go to the shade underneath of it. So not only does it shield the landing board from water and heavy dew, rain, storms, which are coming right up, but it drops the temperature down to 80, 81. So we have a 15 to 20 degree drop, so it cools the face of that brood box and keeps the rain and water off the landing board, even though the landing board is tipped away from the hive. It's a huge advantage to have a simple visor like this on the front of the hive that provides shade, protection for the bees, and keeps that landing board dry. So this is a split we just made. Lots of bees flying around, to be expected. Now the foragers that we took with those frames will eventually mostly find their way back to the parent colony that we took the split from. The nurse bees will remain with these brood frames. And even some of the workers will just go ahead and continue to work this colony now that we've created a new one. It is only 25 to 30 feet away from the colony that we split from, and we have a feeder shim on top, and it is also a source for venting here. And later, of course, this is going to be a flow hive. Now we come back to the hive that we took the split from. 3 days afterwards, there is chaos here. These bees are angsty, they're feisty, they want to sting you, you get guards right away, and they are queenless. So we're going to fix that. First thing I want to do though is I'm going to take a queen in the cage. These are weaver queens from the bee weaver family in Texas. I'm just going to lay her on here. If they don't want a queen around, they're going to treat this cage like it has an intruder in it, and they're going to start attacking and trying to sting through it. But that's not what happens. I think my suspicions were correct. There is no queen in this colony. I think that she's warmed out just before we did that split. And look, these guys are sticking their tongues out trying to feed the queen. The queen bee is in here, and she's got some workers with her so they can help feed her. And there's a sugar plug on the left. And we're going to be introducing a queen into the colony that we took the split from. So we're losing those genetics from that queen, but the queen we're replacing is a weaver queen as well. So we're in the same genetic line. Now that's the other thing. If you're installing a new queen in an existing colony, and it's of the same line of bees, same genetic strain, they're more apt to accept her. If I brought in a buckfast or an Italian or some other line of bee, they may not accept her. But look at all the landing board activity. Of course, it's raining now, which makes the bees even happier in opposite land. And now this is the split that we made, and I've taken that top medium off, and this is the deep. And look at what the bees are doing. So all I'm doing is making sure, wow, do they want a queen? Sometimes you can make the mistake of creating a split and you end up moving the queen with your brood frames that you take for the split. But these are queenless. There would be eggs inside this colony if the queen had gone with them, but there wasn't. And look how readily they are accepting the queen that is in this cage. So what I'm going to do, and some people will not like this method, but this is what I'm going to do. They've been without a queen for at least 3 days, and based on what we saw in the parent colony, even more than that, I am going to just pull the cork out of the left end here. The candy plug is on the right. That would be the slowest release method. But based on their behavior, I'm going to pull the plug out of the left, and I'm going to let that queen go right down into the brood frame. Now, remember, this is 3 days after we did the split. It is also much cooler. So a lot of the bees are staying right on the brood to keep them warm. And it's a little windy outside. And what do you think? I'm just going to pull, now if I pull that cork out, are they going to attack the queen? Or are they going to accept her? I'm taking a gamble. Now, if you want to make sure that they have time to, adapt to her pheromone, to feed her for a while, and pull the plug on the right. I'm going to pull the plug on the left here. I'm going to wrench out that cork, and then I'm going to let her go right down in the brood frames. And I will bet you that she does just fine. Cork's out. There we go. And who's going to come out first? Worker bee. Now the other thing is, look how fat that worker is. The abdomen is fully extended. These bees were extremely well fed. They came through priority mail, United States Postal Service, and they came through in perfect shape. All the bees were alive. None of the workers that are with the queens are dead. And let me just arrange this right over the brood frame. I would like the queen to go out of that hole and straight down into the brood. Now, with this release method, direct release, I'm taking a gamble. I mean, they could attack her and kill her. It's very common to see them sting and attack the workers that come with the queen. But they didn't. That first worker went out and is perfectly fine, roaming around, and seems to be accepted. So now let's see if the queen will come out. We get a look at her. She has a green dot right on her thorax there, and that's going to help me identify her. And if they replace her, I'm going to know it. There she goes, right out the end there. Hello, bees. And they just started attending her right away. Nobody got flustered. Down she goes, right into the brood frames like she owns the colony. So now, look at the behavioral difference we have on the landing board. They have a queen, which means that now this colony is what's referred to as being queen right. So they've got her pheromone in there. So this is the hive that we took the split from. They were very active. They were very defensive. They seemed very, on at ease. And now they're spreading the queen's pheromone around. Now, I did not direct release the queen into this parent colony. I did stick the queen cage inside and put her right on the brood frames there so that they could go through the candy, plug, and release her in the next day or two. But based on their activity around the cage and the fact that they are working on that candy plug right now, tells me that they are going to release her very fast, and I'll just come back in a day or two and remove the cage. So it's a dramatic change. We obviously had a parent colony that was in disarray. They were missing their queen. I think they probably drove her off. I probably missed a swarm by a day or two, and so there was no queen in the colony. And now we have weaver queens in both the hive that we split from and the hive that we created. So I hope you enjoyed this. Of course, we have storms and rain coming in. Why wouldn't we? And we'll give you updates on this later, but next Friday we're going to be talking about the Saskatraz bees, and we're going to show their progress. So thanks for watching as always, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great weekend.